We're a few days now into patch 10.10. It's that point of the patch where we finally have some stats to make our predictions and tier list out for 10.10. So make sure you smash that like button, destroy the sub button, and let's jump right in. Starting off, of course, with the mid lane, we've got one champion that really just needs to be highlighted, even though there's two in broken tier right now. And let me make this really clear. This is not a meme. Annie is actually unironically broken tier right now. Her buffs have seen her skyrocket from the very middle of the pack in mid lane all the way to the top. She has what she needs to survive against really good burst in the early game thanks to her E just being better now from the buff, and her added damage from her R is actually turning out to be even more insane than we already thought it was going to be. But Annie can't quite seem to keep every single assassin down and out of the mid lane because Pyke is actually outperforming her by quite a bit. And he's been doing this in previous patches too, so it's no surprise there. He's still one of the strongest mid laners on this patch. Still though, somebody should really call up LS and tell him that his Annie dream is almost finally coming true. And now as we move into the S tier, we're going to highlight Cassiopeia because we want to point out something that's very important. Mid lane has changed up a lot because the jungle has gone through a pretty much unforeseeable, massive shaking up of the champions that are popular and good in the meta. This almost entirely stemmed from the experience changes that Riot made. This caused Cassiopeia to really shoot up super high in win rate in the middle of patch 10.9, and even though she wasn't quite as strong as she is now on this patch, that's because now on 10.10, things are starting to settle and people understand that Cassiopeia's W and ultimate are extremely important for countering engages from a lot of the meta champions, and it's not even just other mid laners. Let's be real, Cassiopeia has never had much of a problem scaling in her lane. She's not that difficult to play for most people, and her ranges are pretty good. It's everything that happens after the fact that can cause champions to be bad even if their lane might be okay. And the reverse could be true too. Even if you're bashing somebody so hard and just taking their lunch money, if they scale and manage to get to the point where they can just beat you in every single team fight that ever happens, you don't win. So your champion isn't really good in that scenario and might not be good overall. And that is exactly why our A tier highlight is going to be Katarina. This is the exact case that we just talked about. Katarina still has the ability to snowball in the early game. She can get kills and she spikes really hard when she gets her gunblade. But with her scaling gutted so hard and the amount of damage that she drops on multiple daggers as the game goes on is so high that cases where she used to win, she just doesn't anymore because she doesn't do enough damage. Sure, a 15-0 Katarina is gonna sneeze in your AD carry's direction and then they're no longer going to be there, they're gonna be on the gray screen simulator. But at any time before that, when the Katarina is 5-0 or maybe even 7-0, who knows, and is starting to scale and lose damage because her level scaling isn't as good, she might not be able to kill people that she needs to in order to win team fights for her team. And this is one of those changes that's actually been felt just about equally in both low elo and high elo. And while we just mentioned the differences between low elo and high elo briefly, let's talk about Irelia as our B tier highlight then. This champion's really interesting because she always seems to perform pretty poorly on every single patch, even though she has a lot of potential. Part of this is because she's hard to play. But Riot did something really weird on the patch notes this time around. They admitted that they wanted to keep Irelia as a champion who is only seen in pro play. And that seems really odd because that just completely destroys anybody who wants to actually play her in lower ranks. Still though, if you actually dedicate some time to her and learn her, even though she's pretty difficult and also hard to play in the first place because she is a melee champion in the mid lane who isn't an assassin, you'll be pleasantly surprised with how strong you can be. Sweeping our way into C tier, let's talk about a champion who's a new recent addition to the C tier. Sylas has really not been doing so hot lately. He's like that slice of pizza that you left in your fridge and you're really not sure if it's actually good or not because you can't remember if it's been a month or a day since you last put it there. But you'd expect that it'd be pretty okay because it looks fine, but in reality, it's nowhere near that. Don't make the mistake of getting baited by the slice of pizza. Trust me. Sylas is exactly the same. He sounds like he would be perfectly fine right now in the mid lane meta, but he just can't find a good place. Even though he has really good healing, pretty good damage, and a lot of mobility, he just doesn't have enough that's consistent because a lot of his things are skill shots and other people who are very strong right now have a way to counter his massive healing. And lastly for D tier, for any of you guys who are happen to be wondering how Akali seems to be doing, she's actually seeming to bottom out at 44% win rate, which to be fair, isn't the worst thing that we've ever seen in League, but it's definitely not anything but D tier. How many of you guys were around for the Ornn release? Cause that man had an awful time when he first got released. But hey, while we're talking about Ornn, let's not waste any time. Let's just go right up to the top lane. For our broken tiers right now, the best performers on this patch, and it's so weird to me, Singed and Urgot are the two big boys on the block. So whatever you do, just remember the golden rule. do not chase a singed. His poison trail is not good for your health, despite what you might believe, and he is not Walter White. He is actually legitimately just a crazy chemist that does not care about life. Just remember that every time that he flings you over his head and laughs at you, it's because he knows that you're gonna die eventually. But as we steer clear of that singed poison and we go into the S tier, let's highlight Camille, as this is a champion that I actually made a very tough call on. You see, Camille's in a spot right now where her win rate in high elo is absolutely fantastic. She's an excellent champion right now. But when you're in silver, bronze, iron, and even gold, she doesn't seem to be doing that great. But the moment that you hit platinum, Camille is one of the top performing top lane champions. And I legitimately believe that many people simply don't know how to play her, and that's contributing to why she has such a poor win rate in lower elos. So if you could put some time into Camille and actually learn her, you're definitely going to notice that she's very strong right now. And I firmly believe that everybody can reach a mechanical level of platinum at the very least. People in League are actually a lot better than people give themselves credit for. So hey my friend, you're actually doing pretty good. But now's the time for the A tier highlight. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm kinda salty about this one. This is the inner New Yorker coming out in me, alright? Y'all thought last time, and when I went over the patch notes for the PBE and the patch notes when they came out, that Maokai was not going to be affected by his mana changes. But here we are, looking at his win rate, he's definitely moving down to A tier based on his performance so far, given that nothing else has changed. And if you want to take high elo as any type of indicator, he's gone from the number 1 on last patch all the way down to like number 20. And I mean, hey, that's just how the game works. You guys get to tell me when I'm wrong, and I get to tell you when you're wrong. It goes both ways. And I appreciate all the legitimate feedback that you guys actually give me. And now for B tier, the highlight here is gonna be Pantheon. You see, Pantheon's in a weird spot. He is very, very strong in the early game, but like we talked about before in the mid lane, being strong in the early game doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna win the game. Right now, there's a lot of peel and a lot of tanky champions who are popular right now, and as a top laner who can often get outscaled, Pantheon is not doing super well right now. He's not doing particularly awful, but that's exactly why he's landed in the B tier. But now we get to talk about the C tier, and the C tier is where we've landed Yasuo after him being B tier for a couple patches. With the meta shifting around left and right, Yasuo just doesn't find himself in a good space in the top lane. While he does scale really, really well, there's just too many people who can oppress him early on in lane, and he'll be far behind enough that he can't do anything at that point. A perfect example would be somebody else from the B tier, Set. Yasuo wants to dash through minions and get really good poke on people, but if he dashes into the minion wave, he just lines himself up for a free SETI and then he takes a bunch of damage for no reason. So he could never afford to go aggressive, and he can't really play defensively because his only defensive tool is wind wall, and there's nothing ranged to block. Lastly in D tier, we've done enough bashing on Akali for a while now, let's talk about Ryze. Ryze is a champion who's actually really hard to play, and it's not just because he's mechanically difficult, he is more difficult than most champions in the game, but beyond that, there's a lot more that goes into it. The problem with Ryze is that you'd want Ryze, a champion who is difficult and hard to play, to have a really good ceiling of his skill. But the thing is that players even in Diamond barely edge out a 49% win rate, so his performance is still basically just 50-50. Ryze is not a champion who we want to recommend to anybody, no matter what their skill level is, unless they are some of the best in the world. And I'm not talking about the top 2% of Diamond, I'm not talking about the top 1%, I'm talking about the top 0.1% of players are really where he starts to shine through. Despite that, even if you aren't discouraged from trying to play Ryze and climb with him in your games, then the only piece of advice I can give you is to go check out our website, GameLeap.com. Let's face it, League's a complicated game. Champions can be hard, there's stuff that you need to do across the map in terms of macro. You also need to understand how to win your lane, how to play your champion, how to play against the enemy champion with your champion. There's a lot of factors. Considering that there's 10 people in every game, you could technically multiply everything by 5 too. But we can offer guides by challenger level players, the best of the best who are experts on exactly what they're talking about in order to teach you these concepts and get you better so that by the time you're playing your next game, you already know exactly what you're going to do coming into it so that you can have the best chances of winning possible. And now that you're already well on your way to filling up the big wrinkly thing that sits inside your skull with everything that you need to know in order to win, let's talk about the tier list for the Bush Boys. Broken tier here is gonna be Trundle, and honestly this is another tough call. This patch actually has a lot of really tightly knit top performers, but Trundle is doing both well in low elo and high elo, and this is definitely because of the presence of more tanks and people who are vulnerable to the types of CC and damage that Trundle brings. Moving away from the isolated broken tier with Trundle, let's talk about Nunu for a second. He is a tanky, fast farming, and pretty damn good scaling jungler. He kinda checks off all the boxes for what you need to be really strong on this patch. He really starts to shine through once you hit gold and as you move on into platinum and the higher ranks. Just be careful though, because if you don't know how to deal with the champions that naturally do well into Nunu, then you're gonna have a tough time. One of those just happens to be Trundle. But honestly, I just really want to get into our A tier, because our highlight here is going to be Udyr. Because believe it or not, like I said on our patch breakdown and analysis video, Udyr actually is doing spectacular with those movement speed buffs. Just 5 MS can make the difference on a champion if that champion is pretty much entirely reliant on his movement speed. But at the same time, I'm actually kind of concerned, because somehow this man's win rate has jumped like over 1.5% from last patch. He was just barely 50% in most elos. Now in like gold and platinum, the man is shooting above the stars, way beyond 52%, and I'm just like, whoa, slow down, bud, because this is crazy. It actually just completely breaks my brain in half to see Udyr go from a 52% win rate in platinum to a 48% win rate in diamond. It's honestly just funny. So I mean, hey, if your goal is to hit diamond, Udyr's not a bad choice right now. But let's bring it back in while we talk about the B tier. Let's highlight Sejuani. Plain and simple, because she's a really good example of how you can't just meet every single criteria that the meta calls for and also be good at the same time 100% of the time. Sejuani does farm relatively fast. However, at the same time, I would also like you to tell me how exactly a Sejuani is supposed to fight against a Trundle or a Nunu. But let me stop before I go through the entire rest of the tier list, because Sejuani can't really contest people early on her own. This is because she lost damage in her passive, which really hurt her 1v1 potential. Plain and simple, even the other champions who are supposed to focus on farming can actually beat Sejuani in 1v1s. So it's very likely that she might get killed at the crab, or even at her own buff if she gets invaded. At that point, there's plenty of other tanks that offer similar things to Sejuani that are just plainly better than her. And now for C tier, let's highlight Nocturne, as he has just recently moved up from D tier, and this is because of the experience changes and the shift in the meta. Nocturne's level 6 is one of the most impactful level 6s in the entire game. Period. While you would technically be better off playing him in the mid lane where he can more quickly reach level 6 and levels beyond that point, he's still good in the jungle because the shift to farming junglers means that Nocturne won't have to worry too much about having early game pressure. The game gets taken more at a pace that Nocturne really likes. But he still has a pretty hard time beating out most other junglers in 1v1s unless something really spectacular happens to go his way. Whether he manages to completely surprise somebody from a bush, or get a really good invade, or maybe he has a really sick fight at his level 6 spike, whatever it is. I mean, really, Nocturne's whole thing is about being like super scary and about, you know, his ultimate being called paranoia and all that jazz, but I mean, we're just gonna have fiddlesticks for that kind of thing now, right? That's a big feels bad man for Nocturne. Somebody else already took his job. But honestly, I don't think anybody could take the job of worst jungler away from Yorick. The whole problem with Yorick is that his ganks are kind of short range. But before you even get to the ganking stage, you need to kind of hit level 2, probably level 3, and to get to that point, you're gonna have to clear at least 3 camps, usually your red, blue, and gromp for the fastest level 3 on most champions. But when you do that, you don't get the chance to use your ghoulies to tank camps for you. So throughout the entire jungle clear, your passive is entirely useless and provides no benefit. Not only that, but when you do actually gank, you won't even have any to take on a gank with you. So you have to do something really suboptimal and clear something like, who knows, maybe Raptor Camp or even Wolves along the way. And when you do that, you slow down your ganking time, you have trouble getting to the lane at the right time, you could see how the problems cascade from there. Yorick jungle needs a lot more than just some buffs to his ghoulies in order to be good, and that hasn't changed since the last couple patches. But now that we've got jungle nice and neatly wrapped into the sushi roll that belongs on your plate right now, let's go into the bot lane and talk about how people are having an absolute fiesta. When I tell you guys that legitimately every single champion on this list almost made a move, I am completely serious about that. Well, okay, actually, I'm lying. Hold on, there is one lie detected. Yasuo is definitely staying at the top. But aside from that, no lies detected, okay? So the thing is that with all of the support meta changing up so crazily over the past couple patches, and the bot lane going to be changing really drastically in the future, right now things are already unsteady as it is. One thing is certain though, and that is that our broken tier highlight just has to be Yasuo. He is by far and above the best performing bot laner. But before you, and yes you, I see you typing right now in the comments, come in here and call me a liar for not including mage bot laners. You're making a decent point, I'll give you that. But here's the thing. Even though in Diamond and above, Cassiopeia is by far outperforming Yasuo in the AD carry position, nobody is really playing it in lower ranks, and also Cassiopeia is a difficult champion to play in the bot lane because of the amount of damage that you need to do clashing with the amount of mana that you have available to you. With the current support meta, it can be almost impossible for Cassiopeia to actually find a kill and actively pressure her opposing bot lane. She is also extremely vulnerable to early game ganks and to deep gank paths into the bottom lane. That's why we slide her in as the S tier highlight, because right now, mage bot laners are starting to get a lot more popularity. That's why you're going to see some of the other ones sprinkled in throughout the rest of the tier list. There's actually a statistically relevant number of games being played on these champions now, so we can accurately say something about them rather than just pulling things out of our hat. +1 for professionalism, huh? But taking a hop down into the A tier, let's talk about Misfortune. As part of both the changing support meta and the nerfs that Misfortune received on this patch, she is performing significantly less good on this patch. I've heard a lot of people actually say that the nerfs wouldn't really do anything, and that Misfortune would still be one of the strongest champions in the game, if not the strongest bot laner. And that just seems so foreign to me because, to me, it seems really obvious that she wouldn't. And it turns out that in this case, I was actually right. But I'm glad that people were trying to discuss on their opinions on the patch. That just means that you guys are here to learn and you want to hear more, so why not? I'd love to talk about it. Despite the nerfs, Misfortune is still doing pretty alright in fights. It's just her issue is that she loses out on everything else across the map, as the movement speed nerfs really affect her getting to lane, moving between lanes, going to objectives, coming off of respawns, getting to fights first, all that stuff. I actually wouldn't be that surprised if she had more of a performance closer to something that belongs in B tier this patch. But speaking of B tier, let's talk about Senna. Senna's a weird champion because you could pick her both as an AD carry or a support, and in both roles, people effectively just accept that Senna plays fasting Senna now no matter what. If the Senna's in the lane, then she's gonna be the support champion. It's just a matter of whatever you want to play with it. Do you want to play a set with her? Do you want to play Tahm Kench? Do you want to play Cho'Gath? You know, there's a ton of options. The tricky thing is that many times when the Senna is the support player, they'll be playing with normal AD carries. You know, you might have like an Ashe Senna bot lane. But if you're playing Senna as an AD carry and yet still going fasting, your support might still play a support champion, and that drastically changes the performance. So it's really hard to gauge where she is, but for now, we're gonna mostly go off of what her support stats are, but still place her in both support and AD carry tier lists in the same tier. And I'm being absolutely serious here, guys. Just comparing the number of matches that were played globally on Senna that right now I'm looking at on one of the websites that I use, it's less than 10,000 matches played versus her in support having over 182,000 games on this patch already. Senna definitely is a champion who challenges the idea of a traditional AD carry support bot lane and really makes the statistics hard to interpret for exactly that role. But now for C tier, let's talk about Aphelios, as he is a champion who many people thought would rise back up again after having a different build, thanks to the ability to adapt with a new build that somehow leveraged the fact that he gets lethality instead of armor penetration now. The simple answer is, not really. He doesn't have anything super special that seems to be crazily propelling him to be one of the best champions on the patch, and he really is barely outperforming the very bottom of the barrel. Who knows though, it does seem like the majority of people aren't taking advantage of presence of mind on Aphelios, so maybe if they make that switch, Aphelios might actually end up being a decent champion across this patch. And lastly, for AD carry in the D tier, there's only one champion here, and that's Kai'Sa. And I want to explain why she's here, because it seems like a lot of people were very confused in the past. One of the things that I consider when ranking a champion on our tier list is what you might want to call a sort of difficulty curve or even a learning curve, right? There's a certain number of games that you need to play before you actually understand and be comfortable on a given champion. And Kai'Sa has a pretty steep one of those. But it's not just that, because Kai'Sa across all ranks is the single worst performing AD carry everywhere. That includes Master, Grandmaster, and Challenger. She is the only AD carry to have that consistent of a bad performance. And with that being the case, it's just impossible for me to say that Kai'Sa is a champion that you should try and pick up. Even though she has a higher pick rate than most other AD carries, she still is just absolutely trash everywhere. And that's why her ban rate is so low. People don't see her as a threat, and she really isn't one. If I'm trying to give you guys a tier list that combines difficulty, win rate, ban rate, popularity, and everything else in between into a single cohesive, understandable piece of information like this one, Kai'Sa is definitely not meeting any of that criteria to be anywhere but D tier. And with AD carry finalized, let's go into support. This role actually got a lot of movement up and down, but the one person in the top who has a really consistent performance across all elos is Janna. She is our broken tier highlight. Janna is an incredibly consistent and relatively simple champion who has a really good peeling pattern, as well as the ability to support AD carries and other damage focused champions who like AD with her shield. The best thing about Janna is that both of her CCs in her Q and her R are unreducible because they are knock up or knock back effects. This is what contributes to her really amazing consistency. It's really hard for anybody to try and mitigate something like that through buying items no matter what they try and do. Tenacity isn't going to help you if somebody just sent you reverse skydiving. Moving on from Janna and into our S tier, let's talk about Soraka. The only real reason why Soraka is not also in the broken tier is because she's reliant on her team. That's just as simple as I could place it. Janna can really easily keep herself safe because her CC is so good. However, Soraka only has a slow and a silence, and she can get movement speed towards her allies if they are low, but most of the time that's not really enough to get her out of bad situations. Technically, both of them do lack damage, but Janna does have more early game pressure compared to Soraka, and also more convincing late game damage. Really, it's only a matter of time before people get really comfortable playing with and around a Soraka, and once that time comes, she's going to be so incredibly broken. But A tier does show off a couple champions who could keep somebody like Soraka from going super wild. For A tier, let's highlight Taric. He did just get nerfed, and the nerf was pretty substantial to his late game, specifically though for the defense that he provides to allies. At that point in the game, Taric already has plenty of armor, and he's not really getting that much of a benefit from his own W. The thing is that Taric, when he's in a fight and able to auto-attack people, can actually pump out a very significant amount of healing, and he'll also have extra shielding from his W and stuns repeatedly coming out from himself and his bastioned ally. He is one of the few supports that can actually contest somebody like Soraka in the very late stages of the game because of the sheer amount of utility that he brings with his Q, his passive, his W, his E, and his R, pretty much in that order. Believe it or not, even despite the fact that his R makes people invincible, usually the Q healing that happens during that time, before it, and after it outshines that ability on its own. And of course, B tier being the middle of the pack, let's talk about Yuumi. At this point in time, it's pretty safe to say that people understand that you're supposed to buy Executioner's Calling or have some other kind of Grievous Wounds effect against Yuumi in the bottom lane. Or for that matter, at any point in the game, people just need it because Yuumi's healing is absolutely ridiculous. It seems like both Yuumi players and people playing against Yuumi now understand pretty well the strength of the champion, and that's exactly why Yuumi has just about a 50% win rate across most elos. In the C tier though, things really start to take a sharp turn downward. Let's highlight Lux here. She really is in a tough spot right now because she's not great in the mid lane and she's just barely okay in support. And it's really tough because many other supports just provide more consistent and accurate value to their team. Lux is all skill shots. If you aren't landing them, it's not going to be fun. Lastly in D tier, let's highlight Set. Omnistone Set support can be good, but 1, it's not easy to play, 2, it's kind of inconsistent, and 3, it doesn't work into everything. You gotta have a good reason to pick Omnistone Set support. Usually it ends up being the case that the enemy team has a really big front line in terms of some specific champion who might buy Stoneplate or whatever it might be that just makes Set ulti super valuable. There's also other reasons too though, like perhaps you're playing a super cheesy lane like Set Swain. Outside of that though, you're probably gonna want to avoid him. And with that is all of our tier lists for patch 10.10. To find exactly what you need in order to improve, learn, and win in your games, make sure you go check out our website, GameLeap.com. Whether you're trying to pick up a champion that we went over in this tier list, learn something like a new skill, whether it be related to macro or micro on a specific champion, maybe you're trying to learn some tips and tricks for a specific lane or the jungle, everything is up there for you, and everything is done by challenger level players. Our challenger content creators are experts on everything that they talk about, so you know that you're getting the best information straight from the source. We're always working on making more and better content, so if there's something in particular that you want to see, make sure you let us know and we can get to working on it right away. And if you made it this far, thanks for watching the whole video. But right now, I just want to take a hot minute to step aside and enter an Ace Windstorm real talk moment. On the last tier list, I happened to notice a lot of people saying things that were just like completely wrong, like on the level of 2 + 2 = 5 is wrong. I legitimately hope that you guys be careful in what words you take for granted, because from what I can tell, it seems like a lot of people are being misled by other channels on YouTube that claim to be accurate and educational, but just are spewing absolute garbage. At the end of the day, that just hurts you guys and hurts the game as a whole, and that really sucks to see. I'm always down to hear your guys' thoughts on everything that I do, whether it be a tier list or a patch analysis, anything. At the very least, just make sure that when you're watching stuff on YouTube, the stuff that I do included, you ask questions to yourself and don't just immediately take it to be right. And I read a lot of the comments that people make on our videos. I might not respond to all of them, but it definitely makes me sad to see some stuff that's just completely out there. But this one's already getting pretty long, so make sure you take care of yourself and use that wrinkly thing inside your skull. Anyways, as always, my name is Ace Windstorm, and I will see you all later.